Welcome to Kindly Neurodivergent with Kay. Before we start, a quick note. This episode is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. And if you notice pauses in our conversation, that's intentional. That's part of how we talk. Today Adam Malone is here with me. He will be talking about disability inclusion, countering infantilism, and how to present yourself. Welcome, Adam.
Hey, it's so good to be here. Really, really excited to talk with you today. Yeah.
Can you tell our listeners a little about yourself and how you identify within the disability community?
So, my name is Adam Malone. I'm the Technology and Communications Manager at Adventures by Jamie, which is a travel agency specializing in travel for people with disabilities. And I also am the host of a podcast called the Handicapable Podcast, where we interview people in the disability community and kind of get their take on the world. And I have a form of muscular dystrophy called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And I lost my ability to walk when I was around 14. And since then, I've really wanted to kind of advocate for the wider disability community.
Were you diagnosed until?
I was diagnosed when I was 2 years old. And a lot of times with this version of muscular dystrophy in particular, sometimes it's diagnosed much later. So it was good that for me it was caught early. But what they've started to do is push newborn screening so people can be diagnosed even earlier. But for me, it was two.
What does true disability inclusion mean to you beyond physical accessibility?
Well, I would say true disability inclusion is, if we take that term, at face value, disability inclusion, it really means to me being included in all, all spaces, not necessarily just, having the ability to get into a building. I think that being included in all walks of life is the big thing there. And I do think it has gotten better over the years. We see people with disabilities now in Congress. We see disabled entrepreneurs, and I think if we have more of that, that kind of is true disability inclusion.
What is missing?
Well, you know what I would say currently is missing is the social side of things. I would say it's the social view historically on those with disabilities has not been the best, and a lot of times we were seen as almost like a lesser form of being, and not necessarily a human being. In a sense. Now I would say that is getting better, but there are still people out there who treat us like we are not their equals. And I think when society gets to a point where we can be treated with the same respect that everybody else gets, then I would say that kind of is the missing link with disability inclusion.
How would you define infantilism in the disability context?
Oh, this is a big one. So, essentially, what an infantilism is basically when someone with a disability is treated as if they are a child when they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, even. And it's a big issue that most of us in the disability community face. And basically, it's just we take the term infant, um, or kid. We use that term infantilism, infant meaning, kid, and then they use that to talk to adults in a way that makes the person disabled feel like they're being taught to as if they're not mentally competent or as if they don't understand. And that leads to really, really awkward situations. And also, it's something where if you're, let's say, shopping with a parent or a friend, a lot of times if you run into somebody that they will not be talking directly to you. They will be talking to whoever that you're with. And that is just very, very demeaning and condescending. And, I don't think people do it necessarily on purpose. I don't think they're trying to be rude or mean. I think that you know, historically, since we have been viewed as being, not equals, we are not treated as equals by everyone. And so, it leads to these awkward encounters with people. And I mean, it really just affects really all walks of life if you're just in a, position where you're treated that way. But yeah, that's essentially what infantilism is.
Why is it still this way?
Well, as I stated before, I think that it is because historically we have been seen as people, who aren't, at the same mental level as everyone else. And now I do understand that there are, conditions out there that will make your mind be at the mental level of a kid. But the issue that we have is that people will conflate all disabilities with that. And they will assume that everyone that has a disability has a brain like that, and therefore everyone with a disability has to be treated the same way. And that's simply just it's just not true. And I know it's just historical. I think that as people get out of that mindset and they learn that we are just the same as everybody else, I think we pretty much knock that out. But unfortunately, with the older generation of people who think that way, you know, I honestly think it can't fully be solved with the current older generation. It has to be solved with the newer generation, unfortunately. But there are just some people who don't want to change or they feel like they don't need to change. And it's just unfortunately how it is. But I think it can get better. And it is getting better, but I think we need a little bit more work on that.
Yeah.
Can you share a personal experience where you felt infantilized and how you
Oh,
handled it?
well, I have experienced this a lot. So I'll give you two examples. So this one was a little bit funny. So I'm in San Antonio. This was 2020. What year is this? 2024. And we're there in San Antonio to see the solar eclipse. So that was a great time. But there's a lot of bars and shopping areas in San Antonio, and so we were just rolling down the street, and there's a guy standing in front of this bar, trying to get people to come in, and he looks at me and he says, "Come on in," and then he says something like, kids can come in until this time. He was like, kids can come in until 8 o'clock. As he's looking at me, and I'm like, was he just talking to me? And at the time, I was 22 years old, and I'm like, and I didn't say anything, but I'm thinking, is this guy really gonna say this to me? So that was a bit embarrassing and awkward, but didn't end up going to that bar, obviously. But another example is I was out shopping at Costco, and I was with my dad. And as you know, in those warehouse stores, they'll pass out free samples just all around the store. And so we
Mhm.
went to this one, we stopped at this one, and the lady behind the desk area looked at my dad and was like, "Is he allowed to have one?" I'm like, I didn't say
Oh,
anything, but I'm like, if I was maybe 5 years old, that would be appropriate. But you don't say that to a grown adult. And granted, I wouldn't say I look the oldest, but I think that just because you see a chair doesn't mean you need to assume those things of people. And so I mean, and that's happened a whole lot more times than that. I mean, it's happened to tons of people that I know, and it's a real, I would say it's one of the biggest issues we face because it really affects people's self-esteem and a sense of self-worth. And so, it's a really tough thing to deal with. And I hope it continues to get better.
Or any other form of disability.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think we need help in for everyone who's disabled. Yeah.
What's the difference between being supported and being controlled?
Ooh. Ooh. Okay. Well, that's a a bit of a complicated one, I would say. You know, being supported. If we're talking in a family context, I'm assuming,
mhm.
being supported is one being able to get the care that you need, being able to get the equipment that you need, if that's possible, being able to, you know, be able to be fed, be under a home, and just generally being supported by your family as someone with a disability. And where it becomes control, and unfortunately it can become control quite easily. And when it becomes control is if your parent thinks, and this is if you're an adult living at home. It's different when you're out on your own, but as far as for adults living at home, control, it is when your parent won't let you go out on a date. Your parent won't let you go out to the movies, let's say, or go shopping on your own because they think they're looking out for you, but in fact they wouldn't be doing that if you weren't disabled. So that's where it becomes control. It also becomes control if and luckily I would say that I have parents that are very great, and this isn't necessarily something that they do, but I have seen situations where you know they won't be allowed to do anything on their own because the parent uses safety as an excuse. And then I'll give you an example. And I don't want to put my dad under the bus here, but something that I always want to do since I was of driving age was be able to drive a car, right? But the issue is because I am disabled, I am not afforded that luxury, and I think it's mainly a safety issue. I feel like my parents think that it maybe is not safe. However, if I was not disabled, I would be driving by now. So, and I have the ability to, there's hand controls and stuff. And that happens a lot in the disability community. That is very, very common. And then also, parents will, still treat their adults as children sometimes. That can be um, a bit much. That doesn't happen in my situation. I currently, have two working jobs and stuff, and I'm able to go travel and meet all kinds of people, and it's great. But for people who are in that situation, I think that it can be hard. But I would say that that's really when it becomes control, when you aren't allowed to do things within reason that other people your age can do.
My family is great.
Oh, yeah, that's good to hear, and I hope many people have that same experience.
How does your disability affect you?
Well, for those of your listeners who aren't familiar with muscular dystrophy in general, the wide umbrella term muscular dystrophy essentially is a neuromuscular disease that affects um, the dystrophin in your muscles and how it creates muscle, because dystrophin is the protein that helps bind muscle together. And with muscular dystrophy, at varying severities, this dystrophin is either not there at all, or there in very tiny amounts where it does not function. So that's where you get dystrophy from. And so my version of muscular dystrophy is called Duchenne, which is the most severe form. And essentially, what it does is it targets your muscles because you don't have the dystrophin at a quicker rate. And you'll see people, in wheelchairs as early as 10. For me, it was 14. Sometimes they'll hold out a little bit longer. It just depends on the person. And and what's good to note here is that years and years ago, the lifespan for someone with Duchenne was around 20. Now you're seeing it in 50s, 55, around that, with the current advancements in medication. I'd like to see that go up. And I think that with gene therapy, gene editing, um, different drugs that help support lung function and cardiac function, I think that we can do that. And I just recently had an interview with someone on my show about that same thing. And we are seeing some promising results on that front. But in terms of how it affects me daily, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Hoyer lift, I have to use that to get in and out of bed. It's essentially a device that you put a sling underneath, and your listeners can look up a picture of that. But essentially, it picks me up, puts me wherever I need to go. And then mornings look like I get in the shower chair, use the bathroom, take a shower, all that good stuff, get dressed, and then once I'm in my chair, I mean that's kind of where I am. That's kind of my legs, as a lot of people refer to it as. And once I'm in my chair, I mean it's really just a normal day of work and playing games and talking to people and doing all kinds of
Yes.
adulting stuff, as they say. But I mean, once you're
Yeah.
in the chair, it's not really you know it's not that big a deal. I will say going out places, you do have to check on accessibility. You have
Yeah.
to check on hotel accessibility. But I mean, really, to be honest, it doesn't affect me too drastically, besides the, morning time, nighttime kind of stuff. But other than that, it really doesn't affect me too much. And I hope that more people have that same view as I do, that you can't really change it. So you might as well live with it and live your life to the fullest, to the best you can.
And not everything is accessible, even if they say that.
Oh, yeah, that definitely is true. Especially with hotels, because as I stated at the top, I work for a travel agency and I travel a lot, and I will note that you get an accessible room, you really got to make sure that they know what they're talking about, because sometimes you won't be able to get your Hoyer lift up underneath the bed. You'll have to get a room with a sofa bed. I mean, it's a whole thing. They'll maybe just put a bar in the bathroom. and say that's good,
Mm.
and then buildings, if they're historical,
Doors
technically
2.
they're, oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you'll find that when I was about to mention about historical buildings, that doorways sometimes will be smaller because they're not, some historical buildings are not, they don't have to follow the same regulations because of their historical significance. And so you find those issues a lot in historical buildings where there's not a ramp easily accessible. You can't easily access the inside of the building. Stuff like that can be very frustrating.
Yeah.
It is surprising.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I wish that all places would be required to follow the same regulations, but
Mm.
unfortunately, just isn't that way.
How do you intentionally present yourself to assert adulthood, autonomy, and competence?
Who? Well, I have this sense of when you are disabled, at least in my mind, I feel like we have to almost overachieve, right? So I mean, I currently work for a tech company, work for the travel agency, I do the podcast, I do some stuff at the church. I feel like that we have to over exceed and find multiple avenues of employment, of volunteer work,
Yeah.
because people assume that we aren't able to do that kind of stuff, and they do not treat us with the same respect that everyone else get. So I almost feel like we have to overachieve in a way to kind of assert that, we're here, we're supposed to be here. We can do pretty much everything that everyone else can do, and we're here to stay. And I feel like, in my mind, that's what I have to do to kind of assert adulthood, is mainly being active in employment and volunteer work, um, all that kind of stuff. Because and getting out there, going to restaurants, not staying at home all the time. That's a big thing. Going
Okay.
shopping, going to restaurants, going to the movies. People seeing you out and doing stuff. That's really a big thing.
What are practical phrases or strategies disabled adults can use when someone talks down to them?
Oh well, you know that's a bit of a tough one, because there, you don't want to cross the line of being insulting or rude, because you got to understand that the person talking down to you is not talking down to you to be mean. So you have to kind of respond as if they said something, a normal adult, someone who isn't condescending to you, would talk to. So if they say like, "Hi, how old are you?" or something like that, just respond as if that they didn't ask something as stupid as that. Just be like, "Yeah, for me, that happened the other day," and they're like, "Hi, how old are you?" I'm like, "Well, I'm 24 years old," and they're like, "Oh, well, yeah, well." And then they'll be taken aback, and they'll be, feel bad. They'll be like, okay. But I really think you just have to respond to their questions as, as an adult. Essentially, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't go off on them and be like, I'm this age and you can't talk to me like that. Why would you do it? No, you don't do that. That's gonna make you look really, really bad. And, the
Agreed.
person doing that to you already looks bad. There's no reason to make yourself look bad in order to educate the other person. As hang on, as we were, taught as children, you wanted to kind of be the bigger person, in that situation. And when someone is treating you like that, you know that they're doing something wrong, and you don't want to look like a jerk in that situation. So I would just say respond as if they asked you a normal question, or just respond to the question in the most adult manner possible. I mean, that's really the best way I can put it.
Agreed. What do well-meaning allies often misunderstand about inclusion?
What's the question? What do people misunderstand about inclusion?
What do well-meaning allies often misunderstand about inclusion?
Let me read your question on here, just so I make sure I'm answering this correctly. Let me go back to where you put that. Hang on, give me one moment. Okay, what do well-meaning allies often misunderstand about inclusion? Okay, cool. Um, ooh, well, I think well-meaning allies don't a lot of times don't understand inclusion, and they will treat us as if we need help from them, as if we need help from the able-bodied community. And I will say that no one has to, and it's good to stand up for us, and that's great, but we don't need like a hero to save us. We don't need that. And I feel like when people are able-bodied advocates, it comes to a point where they think they're better than us, or maybe they don't think that, but it looks like it comes across as if they're saying that they're better than them. If they're saying we need to allow disabled people here, here, and here, well, now are you saying that for disabled people because you think they can't do that, or are you saying that you know they I'm trying to think of the words here, but are you saying that because you mean that, or because you think we need stuff because we're like lesser than you? And so most of the time, well-meaning allies will not do this. But people just sometimes will talk when maybe they should keep their mouths shut, or will if it gets to a point where we are seen as inferior and we have to count on these allies to help us, that's where it becomes a problem.
What would you say to a disabled adult who feels underestimated or unheard?
Oh, that's a big one. Go out and get a job, get a volunteer position, because obviously people sometimes don't want to hire people with disabilities, which is unfortunate, but that's a conversation for another day. But get out there, get out in the world, get out on social media, post about your life, get a job, like I said, volunteer, um, you know, you need to do things that people thought weren't otherwise possible. Go to college, get a degree, if that's what you want to do. The really big thing I would say is that you just gotta, put yourself out there. That's the big thing.
Yeah.
Historically, people with disabilities have just sat at home, felt sorry for themselves, play video games, eat, watch TV, whatever. The days of that are no, that's not how it's going to be anymore. You have to make yourself known and get yourself out there, or you will become the stereotype. These stereotypes about people with disabilities, you are going to prove them right if you just sit at home and do nothing. So you got to get out there, you got to do stuff, or you're just letting those stereotypes, define you.
Live a fulfilling life.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining me.
Oh, absolutely. This has been such a great conversation. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to come on your show, and I hope many listeners will relate to this conversation, and hopefully get some, hate to use the word inspiration, maybe get some inspiration from it, make them think a little bit more.
Please share the show.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll make sure that all of my listeners, check out your episode, and I also just want to put a quick shout out. If you're interested in hearing more of what I have to say, you can check out the Candy Capable podcast on Spotify and all of that. And then I thank you again for allowing me to come on the show.
Yeah.